Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in the domestic price level cuts the real value of household wealth, a movement along the AD curve. The answer is true. Higher prices shrink purchasing power, moving the economy up and left along the downward. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If the central bank cuts interest rates, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left. The answer is false. Lower rates cut borrowing costs and lift consumption. C and investment. I. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The long-run aggregate supply curve is perfectly vertical at the economy's potential output. The answer is true. In the long run, output depends on technology, labor, and capital. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The short-run aggregate supply curve slopes upward because nominal wages and input prices are sticky. The answer is true. When output prices rise while input costs stay fixed, margins widen and Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in the expected future price level shifts the SRAS curve upward or to the left. The answer is true. Workers and firms set higher wages and input prices for expected inflation. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A recessionary gap occurs when short-run equilibrium output is strictly below potential GDP. The answer is true. Demand is too weak for full employment, leaving labor and Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An inflationary gap features an unemployment rate temporarily below the natural rate, NAIRU. The answer is true. Strong short-run demand pushes firms to hire beyond normal capacity, dropping unemployment below. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An economy stuck in a recessionary gap can self-correct over time as nominal wages drift downward. The answer is true. Persistent unemployment erodes wage demands. Lower labor costs shift SRAS right. The class. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Stagflation is stagnant economic growth combined with high inflation. The answer is true. It's typically triggered by a severe negative supply shock that raises both unemployment. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A massive surge in global oil prices shifts the aggregate demand curve directly to the left. The answer is false. An oil spike is a negative supply shock, shifting the SRAS curve. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The sticky wage theory says nominal wages adjust slowly because of long-term contracts and social norms. The answer is true. Wage rigidity keeps labor markets from clearing instantly, helping explain the upward. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The wealth effect says a lower price level raises the real value of money, so consumers spend more. The answer is true. When goods cost less, the cash households hold buys more, directly. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An increase in government defense spending shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right. The answer is true. Government purchases G are a direct component of demand. AD equals C plus macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If a country's main trading partner enters a deep depression, the domestic AD curve shifts right. The answer is false. A foreign slump cuts demand for domestic goods, lowering net exports NX, and macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. By the interest rate effect, a higher price level raises money demand, lifting rates and cutting investment. The answer is true. Higher prices force people to hold more cash, tightening credit and low macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. In the long-run classical framework, an expansionary demand shock permanently raises real GDP above potential. The answer is false. Demand only raises output short-run, long-run, prices adjust, and output macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Misperceptions theory says firms may briefly mistake a general price rise for a rise in their own relative price. The answer is true. Advanced by Robert Lucas, firms misread inflation as demand for their product. Temporary macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. On the vertical LRES curve, any permanent shift in aggregate demand affects only nominal variables. The answer is true. This is the classical neutrality of money. Demand shifts move prices, but leave real out. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A permanent improvement in industrial technology shifts both the SRES and LRES curves to the right. The answer is true. Technological breakthroughs structurally expand potential capacity. A permanent outward macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The original short-run Phillips curve shows a negative trade-off between inflation and unemployment. The answer is true. Historically, lower unemployment came with higher wage and price inflation. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Per Friedman and Phelps, the long-run Phillips curve is horizontal at the target inflation rate. The answer is false. It's a vertical line at the natural rate, Nehru, showing no long-run trade. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If the government shifts AD right, the economy moves up and to the left along the short-run Phillips curve. The answer is true. Higher demand raises output and prices while cutting cyclical unemployment. A movement, a macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An adverse supply shock, like a trade embargo, shifts the short-run Phillips curve upward or to the right. The answer is true. The shock creates stagflation, raising both inflation and unemployment. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If the public suddenly expects higher inflation next year, the short-run Phillips curve instantly shifts down. The answer is false. Higher expected inflation makes workers demand bigger nominal wages, shifting. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. When actual inflation exactly equals expected inflation, the economy sits at its natural rate of unemployment. The answer is true. With no price surprises, the economy rests in long-run equilibrium at Nehru, Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If unemployment drops below the Nehru, inflation tends to accelerate over time. The answer is true. Labor shortages boost workers' bargaining power, driving wages and prices into a Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The sacrifice ratio is the percentage of a year's real GDP given up to cut inflation by 1 point. The answer is true. It quantifies the output loss required to carry out a contractionary Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Under rational expectations, a fully announced, credible disinflation can cut inflation without a major recession. The answer is true. If people believe the policy, they adjust expectations instantly, lowering inflation with little Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A demand-pull inflation spiral starts with continuous, excessive outward shifts of the AD curve. The answer is true. Excess spending pulls prices up as demand outpaces the economy's Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Cost-push inflation happens when rising production costs push the SRAS curve to the left. The answer is true. When wages or raw materials spike, firms cut output and raise Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The business cycle refers to short-run fluctuations of real output around its long-run potential trend. The answer is true. That is exactly the definition. Recurring swings of actual output around its Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The highest point of an expansion, just before a recession, is technically called the trough. The answer is false. That high point is the peak. The trough is the low point just before Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A prolonged, exceptionally severe macroeconomic contraction is generally classified as a depression. The answer is true. Depressions feature long durations, huge GDP declines, and extreme Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The output gap is the percentage deviation of actual real GDP from potential real GDP. The answer is true. It measures how far the economy operates from its sustainable full Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If the output gap is positive, actual GDP above potential GDP, the economy has an inflationary gap. The answer is true. A positive gap means the economy is overheating, pushing wages. Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An increase in domestic labor productivity shifts the SRAS curve to the left. The answer is false. Higher productivity lowers per unit production costs, shifting the SRAS. Macropop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. By the exchange rate effect, A higher domestic price level makes goods pricey and cuts net exports. The answer is true. Dearer prices reduce export demand and raise import demand. Low. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A major stock market boom that raises household wealth shifts the AD curve to the right. The answer is true. The wealth effect from rising asset values stimulates consumption. Shifting. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. In a self-correcting economy, the government must always use fiscal stimulus to close a recessionary gap. The answer is false. The self-correction mechanism can close the gap on its own through downward wage. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. During stagflation, expansionary monetary policy will lower inflation while boosting output. The answer is false. Easier money lifts demand and output, but worsens inflation, deepening the Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The LRES curve can shift left if a country suffers severe permanent destruction of infrastructure. The answer is true. Disasters or wars that wipe out capital stock permanently lower potential. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. In the Keynesian view, the economy's self-correction works too slowly to rely on in severe crises. The answer is true. Keynes noted, in the long run we are all dead. Arguing for active intervention. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If the AD curve shifts left, the price level falls and real output drops in the short run. The answer is true. A contractionary demand shock lowers both equilibrium output and prices along an macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. A vertical long-run Phillips curve implies monetary policy can't permanently change unemployment. The answer is true. Long run, unemployment is set by structural labor market factors. Independent. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The natural rate hypothesis says unemployment always returns to its natural rate long run, whatever inflation does. The answer is true. Fluctuations are temporary. Long-run forces return employment to its structural. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. If a government uses supply-side policies, it aims to shift the AD curve to the left. The answer is false. Supply-side tools like deregulation or tax incentives shift SRES and LRES right to macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. At long-run macroeconomic equilibrium, the output gap is exactly zero. The answer is true. Long-run equilibrium means actual real GDP aligns with potential GDP, so the gap. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. An increase in business regulations that raises compliance costs for all firms shifts the SRES curve right. The answer is false. Higher compliance costs are an adverse supply shock, shifting the SRA. Macro pop quiz. ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. Menu cost theory says firms change prices slowly because adjusting prices carries physical or admin expenses. The answer is true. Menu costs create price stickiness, preventing instant adjustment and supporting the upward. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. In the long run, economic growth is driven mainly by aggregate demand rather than productive capacity. The answer is false. Long-run growth rests on supply-side factors, technology, labor, and capital. Not macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The silo growth model assumes capital has diminishing marginal returns when labor is held constant. The answer is true. Each extra unit of capital added to a fixed labor force yields progressively less. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. In the silo model, a higher savings rate permanently raises the long-run growth rate of output per worker. The answer is false. It lifts the steady-state level of output, but doesn't change the macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The steady state in the silo model is where investment per worker equals capital depreciation per worker. The answer is true. Capital per worker stays constant because new investment just covers. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. A higher population growth rate in the silo model raises the steady-state level of capital per worker. The answer is false. Faster population growth spreads capital over more workers, lowering steady-state capital and out. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Human capital is the education, skills, health, and work experience embodied in the labor force. The answer is true. It captures workers' qualitative productivity, distinct from physical tools. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Endogenous growth theory says technological advance is determined inside the model by economic incentives. The answer is true. Unlike silo, it stresses that R&D, innovation, and knowledge spillovers drive. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. In the silo model, technological progress is the only factor that can sustain long-run growth in output per worker. The answer is true. Diminishing returns mean capital alone can't sustain growth. Technology must keep. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Conditional convergence says poor countries catch up only if they share similar institutions, savings, and technology. The answer is true. Convergence isn't absolute. Only countries with identical structural parameters reach the same. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in the capital depreciation rate shifts steady-state capital per worker downward in the silo model. The answer is true. Faster depreciation requires more investment just to maintain a small. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The classical school says markets self-correct rapidly to full employment via flexible prices and wages. The answer is true. price mechanisms clear surpluses and shortages without any need for macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Keynes argued economies can stay stuck in recession from sticky wages and deficient aggregate demand. The answer is true. Nominal rigidities stop markets from clearing, justifying government action to macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Monetarists, led by Friedman, say business cycles come mainly from swings in money supply growth. The answer is true. They blame erratic central bank policy for instability and favor macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The new classical school assumes agents form rational expectations using all available information. The answer is true. Rational expectations imply people can't be systematically fooled by anticipated macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. New Keynesians explain price stickiness with micro-foundations like menu costs and long-term contracts. The answer is true. These micro-reasons justify why wages and prices don't adjust in macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The golden rule level of capital is the steady state that maximizes consumption per worker. The answer is true. It balances higher capital's payoff against the saving cost needed to maintain macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. If an economy saves more than the golden rule rate, it's dynamically inefficient and could consume more by saving less. The answer is true. Oversaving spends too many resources replacing worn-out capital. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Real business cycle theory says fluctuations come mainly from real supply-side shocks, like technology changes. The answer is true. It views cycles as efficient market adjustments to productivity shifts, not macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Say's law, supply creates its own demand, implies general overproduction or lasting gluts are impossible. The answer is true. Classicals argued income from production always suffices to macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. In the new classical model with anticipated policy, an expansionary monetary shock has zero effect on real GDP, short and long run. The answer is true. Under rational expectations, fully anticipated money is adjusted for instantly, changing macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The policy ineffectiveness proposition says predictable monetary interventions don't influence real variables. The answer is true. From new classical theory, anticipated demand policies leave real output. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The Austrian school favors aggressive central bank coordination to prevent asset bubbles over the cycle. The answer is false. Austrians blame central bank rate manipulation for inflating credit. Macro pop quiz. Growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. In the Solow model with technological progress G, steady-state total output grows at population plus technology growth, N plus G. The answer is true. Output expands to feed both the growing labor force, macro pop quiz, growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. The institution-based view holds that legal structures, property rights, and political stability are vital growth drivers. The answer is true. Good institutions cut transaction costs and secure property, encouraging long-term investment. Macro pop quiz, growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. An economy with a high savings rate will always enjoy a higher standard of living than one that saves less. The answer is false. Saving beyond the golden rule can lower consumption, hurting the macro pop quiz, growth in macro schools. True, false, or uncertain. Schumpeter's creative destruction describes how old industries are continually destroyed by new, innovative technologies. The answer is true. Innovation drives growth by replacing outdated systems with more productive. Subscribe to Macroeconomics with Michael. Like, share, and drop your answer in the comments.